Enterprise risk management. When we move into a new organization, we must fit into the risk management processes in that new organization. We can't insist as risk professionals that I am going to manage risk or create a new risk log to suit my preferences with regards to how I used to manage risk in my previous organization, for example. Rather, risk management for IT must be managed in the same way the organization's enterprise risk management framework is implemented. And remember that a risk in one business unit is a threat to all other business units of the firm. So if there is an IT risk, for example, a risk that an IT system, a legacy system, will go down, that legacy system will not serve IT alone. In most cases, systems that IT supports tend to be systems that serve many different business units or departments. So a risk in one business unit is a threat to all other business units of the firm. A risk to the payroll system, for example, will affect every single department and every employee employee in the event the risk were to materialize. So we just need to remember that when we're managing risk within our organizations, that we shouldn't look at a risk in isolation. Rather, we should take a full view and understand which business units would be impacted upon in the event this risk were to materialize. In other ways of putting what I've just said there, the impact of an IT incident must be measured by its impact on the business rather than the impact on IT, because it's not about IT, really. It's not about us. When we're going into work as risk professionals, the most important thing on our mind should be the business, the business, the business. What will the impact of this risk be upon the business, upon the different business units, upon the business's goals, upon its objectives? How can I do my job well enough to support the business in achieving its objectives? It's not about IT. And as professionals, we must understand the firm's risk culture and let this drive the IT risk strategy. So again, in response to the question earlier, what do I do if the organization doesn't take risk seriously? I'd say, again, give 100%. Don't compromise your ethics. Look for another job and leave if you can't influence the firm's risk culture. The relationship between IT and the business has a major impact on the firm's ability to achieve its objectives. Remember, we've said that this is about supporting the business to achieve its objectives and goals. If IT doesn't have a good relationship with the business and with employees, the organization may struggle to adopt new technologies because we may struggle to enable or empower the business to adopt new technologies. If we don't have a business relationship and a positive relationship with our employees as IT professionals, we may struggle to lower their resistance to new InfoSec controls. It is not our role to stop employees from doing things. As IT and InfoSec risk professionals, it is not our role. We are not there to stop employees from doing their jobs. Rather, it's our responsibility to point out the risks of doing things in a particular way and promoting how to do jobs in a safe way. So, for example, it's not our job to go into an organization and say, okay, we need to block all access to specific websites on the internet, for example. Rather, it's our responsibility to show the organization why these websites are unsafe and to provide an alternative to those, or propose an alternative to those unsafe websites. I've worked in an organization before where there was such resistance to adopt new technologies when I first joined the organization. And I had to go around to different regions to talk to those who were the key stakeholders who were also majorly against change and against the adoption of new technologies. Once I'd managed to persuade those key stakeholders who were also senior stakeholders, they then became champions of change. And they did my job for me in terms of persuading peers and others to adopt the new technologies and controls that we were seeking to implement, that I was seeking to implement. So relationship building is so important. Find out what the pain points are of your stakeholders, your employees, and try and find controls that will enable rather than stop them from doing their jobs in a safe manner. In some cases, it may be impossible for them to access those websites in a safe manner, in which case we tell them that no, you cannot access that website because of this or because of that. Tact, diplomacy, honesty, integrity, professionalism is required to build relationships with our employees so that we can do our jobs Well, risk professionals. We could have risk professionals in governance as senior managers or as board trustees. We could also have risk managers, risk professionals. Let's first talk about governance. Now, this may appear irrelevant to this session, but I'd just like to recount a story of what happened to me when I attended board governance training to become a certified board trustee. The training was delivered by the Institute of Directors. And I remember the first day that I attended this training. It was a year-long course. The first day I attended the training, I sat there with 15 other delegates and we listened to the facilitator explaining the legal responsibilities of board trustees. And we all nearly fell off our chair. During the break, we sat there and we discussed whether it was really worth being or aspiring to become a board trustee. Being a board trustee requires the utmost integrity. There's been a debate about whether chief information officers, chief information security officers in companies should sit on the board, should have a seat at the board. And I would say that being a board trustee doesn't require sitting down. It's a vital role that doesn't only require integrity, it also requires knowledge. Not just knowledge of our own area of competence, such as IT knowledge or InfoSec knowledge. It also requires knowledge of governance, requires knowledge of finance, requires knowledge of risk, requires knowledge of marketing, governance. Being a board trustee requires us to understand how to read financial statements, requires us to know the right questions to ask. Being a board trustee is not about having the title board director. It's so important we understand the legal obligations on a board trustee, which could, in some cases, cost us our homes, the roof over our head. If we reach a decision on a board where the decision is against the law, for example, that could cost us our homes. If a board is found guilty of negligence or any criminal activity, we could be personally liable as board members. So for any board trustee on this session, I'm preparing a board governance workshop to be held in the near future. So I'll let you all know when I deliver that, when I aim to deliver that, and you can all register for that. But risk professionals, senior risk professionals, a chief risk officer, for example, who may sit on the board, or a chief information security officer, head of information security, whatever the title. Please understand that it's not about the title. It's about the responsibility and accountability. And we'll talk about that further. Management, we've got our tech, cyber, and infosec risk professionals, and all employees are responsible for risk management. Why? Why are our facilities staff, for example, responsible for risk management? We'll talk about that later, but answers are welcome in the chat window. The InfoSec risk management professional may be engaged in disciplines such as portfolio, program, or project risk. And I recognize we have some project managers on this session today. May be involved in business continuity planning and disaster recovery, or audit, or information security risk, cybersecurity risk, or technology risk. And here on the right is our information risk management lifecycle, which we'll be discussing throughout this workshop. The first process is to identify the risk, then we assess the risk, we monitor, and we report on the risk. What is the difference between a cybersecurity risk professional, a technology risk professional, and an information security risk professional? Are they the same or are they different? And what should be our joint focus? Any responses in the chat window? Thank you. So a cybersecurity risk professional is focused on online risk management. A technology risk professional is focused on the technologies that exist within organizations and the risks to these. So a cybersecurity risk professional focused on online activities and the risk online in what is often referred to as cyberspace. Technology risk professional, the systems, the risk of an outage to those systems that may actually be caused by a cyber attack, but it may also be caused by a component failing. The focus of the information security risk professional is on risk to data stored in filing cabinets, on systems, and critical business information. Those roles are intertwined, but what about my question, what should be our joint focus? Our joint focus must be the information assets of the organization. Without information, businesses cannot exist. It may be information on our customers, information on our employees, our goals, our intellectual property, but information is wealth. And that should be the joint focus of risk professionals in our industry. Because cyber criminals are not focusing on our certifications. Cyber criminals are not focusing on our education. They're not focusing on our technologies. They're simply focusing on trying to get their hands on our information assets stored on our systems, stored in filing cabinets. That's what they're trying to steal. They're trying to get access to information. And that is why we should focus as cyber tech or information security risk professionals on the risk to our information. Here are further terminologies or definitions. What are assets? That is information or systems of value to a firm. If the information or the system is of no value to the firm, then it is not an information asset. Intellectual property, I've mentioned that. That is an asset to a firm. For example, an aircraft manufacturer. One of their most valuable information assets would be the drawings of their aircrafts. So information assets are information or systems of value to a firm. And why do we only seek to protect information assets of value to a firm? That's because cyber criminals are only interested in information that is of value to us. Our employee data, our customers' data. They are information assets. Threats, they are systems, people, or processes likely to cause harm to our organizations, to our information assets. Yes, it could be a system that has been configured internally, like a firewall that I mentioned earlier. A firewall configuration that has ended up blocking access of internal employees. That is a threat. An internal employee could be a threat because they could maliciously or accidentally configure a system or misconfigure a system rather. Vulnerabilities are weaknesses in controls that would enable a threat to cause harm. Risk is calculated by examining or assessing the probability of a threat exploiting a vulnerability, causing harm due to a vulnerability, times the impact of that threat exploiting the vulnerability. And we will take a look at this further. Impact is the effect of a risk materializing. If this risk were to materialize, what will the impact be to the business, not to IT once more, to the business? And we can avoid a risk by stopping the action that has given rise to the risk. We can reduce the risk to seek to minimize the probability of the impact materializing, or the impact, reduce the impact in the event the risk were to materialize. We could transfer the risk by outsourcing or insuring it, or we could accept the risk where the cost of reduction might outweigh the benefits of treating the risk. We will talk about these different terminologies in detail later on in the workshop. We've seen this before. Something that is of value to our organization is an asset. Data is definitely an asset. Some technologies may be more valuable than others. For example, a company, an e-commerce company's customer database, the technology that sits on and the data would be of critical value to an e-commerce company. Their customer records, personal data, and the technologies that host these, intellectual property, and the most valuable asset of all is a company's employees, people. If you take care of your employees as a company, you're more likely to achieve your objectives. Same as with information security and information risk. If you take care of your employees, develop a good relationship with your employees, you're more likely to oversee a culture where employees are scared to talk about risk or report risk. Rather than overlook risk that they see occurring on a day-to-day basis. If the culture is a blame culture, an employee that sees a colleague repeatedly leaving their laptop unlocked to go for meetings would not deem it their responsibility to talk to the employee, to tell them to lock their device, or escalate to a manager once they've talked to the employee continually and they haven't taken any action. So people are the most valuable assets a company can have. We've mentioned that assets may be intangible, reputation, brand. You cannot put a value on reputation or brand. although we all know the story of Talk, for example. They experienced a security incident many years ago, and their share price has not yet fully recovered to the price it was at before the security breach. So to a certain extent, we may be able to calculate some resultant financial losses from information risk. But in many cases, the value of brand reputation may be intangible. And it may be difficult or impossible to calculate that value or the full value. Again, governance is about the accountability for the protection of assets of an organization. The board of directors, which may also consist of some members of the senior management team, SMT, are accountable for the protection of assets of the organization, including information assets. What is accountability? That means that they're answerable to regulators, to shareholders, to customers, to employees. Answerable to them about any matters that may arise regarding the protection of assets of the organization, including information assets. So again, if you'd like to become a board trustee, or if you are already a board trustee, understand that you are accountable for the protection of all assets of the organization, including the people, the employees, the information assets, the financial assets. And you are answerable to the regulator, to the shareholders, if you're a public company, to employees, to the law. And accountability cannot be outsourced. It cannot be delegated. Whilst we can't delegate accountability, we can delegate responsibility. If a regulator is asking questions of an organization, they don't ask questions of managers. They will ask questions of the board of directors, of the CEO, who will be a board trustee, of other directors who may sit on the board. And accountability is a key word when it comes to board trustees. And that's why integrity is so important for board and senior managers. It's important for all employees. But if we're board trustees, if we're members of a senior management team, then integrity, ethics has to be our key word. What is the board accountable for? They're accountable for the financial operations, management and operational effectiveness, legal and human resources compliance. Human resources compliance with the way employees are treated within an organization. Social responsibility, sustainability, governance of IT investment and operations. And they're also accountable for the risk culture. One of the things that drove me to consider a career in the financial services sector was the 2008 financial services induced global economic crisis. So I had worked briefly in the financial services sector in 1999 or around 1999. And then I left to gain management experience outside of the sector. But when the new financial services crisis started, or the global economic crisis rather, started, induced by misconduct, largely in the financial services sector, that started or revived a desire in me to return to the sector, to seek to reduce risk. Because I was in the IT industry at the time, outside of the sector, I decided to continue along the lines of building upon my previous knowledge and gaining knowledge in IT risk, and then financial risk and conduct risk, and then information security risk, towards working in the sector again, to reduce the risk of fines within the sector to financial services organizations. But the board is responsible for the risk culture, and the crisis that started in 2008 was as a result of risk-taking or negative risk-taking in certain financial services organizations. And the poor risk behavior was actually rewarded and encouraged in some organizations. Yes, and I've seen someone's comment on the case with Mr. Kweku from UBS. That was more recent. And yes, again, that incident occurred as a result of a risk culture that wasn't managed adequately in the bank at the time. Who is accountable for the risk culture? Who is expected to set the risk culture by leading by example? Who is responsible for legal and human resources compliance in the organization? It is the board. So again, if you want to become a board director, please remember that you are accountable for this list of matters, plus more. Questions about your organization's risk culture? Does the board lead by example with regards to compliance, for example? Does the culture allow employees to fail and to openly admit to their failures? Is there a blame culture? That means that an individual who has committed an error, who has accidentally sent an email to the wrong customer containing personal data, is scared to admit that? Do they choose to leave without telling anyone what they've done? Does the culture encourage risk-taking, informed and measured risk-taking, not reckless risk-taking? Does the risk culture reward ethics and transparency, or does it punish ethics and transparency? Does it punish employees who seek to openly report wrongdoing? It's the responsibility of the board to ensure that those who speak up about wrongdoing are not punished. Does the risk culture ignore risk, or does it ensure that everyone learns from risks that have materialized and they use that to build a better organization, a better company? The board is accountable for the risk culture of each organization, whether it's a small organization, whether it's a corporate organization, a social enterprise, a charity. It's the responsibility of the board to ensure a healthy risk culture. IT senior management team governance directs the current and future use of IT, evaluates IT, and controls the usage of IT within an organization. That those accountable for governance need to ask: are we doing the right things as an organization? Is our organization conducting its business in an ethical manner and a professional manner? Are we achieving our stated goals and objectives? And are we realizing the benefits that we set out to achieve over the long term? If an organization is achieving its 5-year term objectives in a year, the board needs to ask questions. If the board has set objectives for a firm to increase its profits by 200% over the course of 5 years. So that is 40% a year. And they end up realizing those benefits over 200% of profit over the course of 1 year. There needs to be an examination or an assessment as to how the organization has managed to achieve those profits in a year rather than over the course of 5 years. Have those profits been achieved through ethical practices? Or has someone cut corners? If it has been achieved ethically, can we sustain that performance? And if it hasn't been achieved, if those profits of 200% in a single year haven't been achieved ethically, the question needs to be asked, okay, how did we get into this position? And what can we do about it? What must we do about it to ensure that we are not cutting corners? To ensure that the values that we seek to ensure exists, the culture, the risk culture that we seek to demonstrate and to ensure that it is followed across the organization is actually the risk culture that exists. Are we doing things the right way, ethically, professionally? It's not just a matter of achieving our outcomes. We have to achieve those ethically. And we have to achieve those outcomes in a manner that is sustainable. Not that we achieve 200% profit this year, which we had stated we would like to achieve over 5 years, and then the next year we lose 200%. We end up with a deficit of 200%. So we're looking to achieve sustainable outcomes for our businesses, for our organizations. Sustainable, ethical outcomes. And that is the responsibility of the board and governance to lead in achieving. Objectives of risk governance. So manage risk to an acceptable level, establish and maintain a common view of risk. In an organization, everyone needs to have a common understanding of risk, not of IT risk, but of risk. We speak a common language. Risk management needs to be integrated across an organization. And business decisions need to be made having considered risk. What is the risk to the business if I were to implement this course of action? Risk governance also needs to ensure that risk management controls are implemented and that they're operating correctly. Note there again for number one, it's not to eliminate risk, it's to make sure that risks are managed to an acceptable level. What are the benefits of risk governance? Improved organizational performance and ability to attain business goals, increased stakeholder confidence, regulators, customers, shareholders, employees will hold increased confidence in an organization if risk governance is led well. A risk-aware culture where everyone understands that it is their responsibility as an employee, as a customer, to contribute towards risk reduction efforts in the organization. Better crisis, incident, and business continuity management, improved controls within an organization, better monitoring and reporting, improved all-around decision-making, where everyone is making decisions based on risk, improved oversight of organizational assets, reduce losses and wastage through cost-benefit analysis, which we'll be talking about later, better threats, vulnerabilities, and risk identification, prioritize risk response efforts, increase legal and regulatory compliance, and increase likelihood of InfoSec project success when we identify and manage our risks.